Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe Jayo Prabhupada Jayo Prabhupada Jayo Prabhupada Jayo Prabhupada जय श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय श्रीमद् ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter number 7, entitled Further Inquiries by Vidura, text number 15. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So again, this is Canto 3, Chapter 7, text 15. Vidura Uvacha Sanchina Samsayo Mayam Sanchina Samsayo Mayam Tava Sukta Sina Vibho Tava Sukta Sina Vibho Ubhayatrapi Bhagavan Ubhayatrapi Bhagavan Manome Sampradhavati Manome Sampradhavati Vidura Uvacha Sanchina Samsayo Mahyam Tava Sukta Sina Vibho Ubhayatrapi Bhagavan Manome Sampradhavati Vidura Uvacha Sanchina samsayo mayam Tava sukta sino vibho Ubhayatrapi bhagavan Mano me sampradavati
Sanchina samsayo mayam Tava sukta sino vibho Ubhayatrapi bhagavan Mano me sampradavati Viduravacha Sanchina samsayo mayam Tava sukta sino vibho Ubhayatrapi bhagavan
Mano me sampradavati. Word for word, Vidura uvacha. Vidura said, Sanchinaha, cut off. Samsayaha, doubt. Mayam, unto me. Tava, your. Shukta asina, by the weapon of convincing words. Vibho, O my Lord. Ubhayatra api, both in God and in the living entity. Bhagavan, O powerful one. Manaha, mind. Me, my. Sampradhavati, perfectly entering. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Chanadavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Vidura said, O powerful sage, my Lord, all my doubts about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities have now been removed by your convincing words. My mind is now perfectly entering into them. Purport. The science of Krishna, or the science of God and the living entities, is so subtle that even a personality like Vidura has to consult persons like sage Maitreya. Doubts about the eternal relationship of the Lord and the living entity are created by mental speculators in different ways, but the conclusive fact is that the relationship of God and the living entities is one of the predominator and the predominated. The Lord is the eternal predominator, and the living entities are eternally predominated. Real knowledge of this relationship entails reviving the lost consciousness to this standard, and the process for such revival is devotional service to the Lord. By clearly understanding from authorities like the sage Maitreya, one can become situated in real knowledge, and the disturbed mind can thus be fixed on the progressive path. Translation again. Vidura said, O powerful sage, O powerful sage, my Lord, all my doubts about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities have now been removed by your convincing words. My mind is now perfectly entering into them. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. It's very nice that excuse me. It's very nice that simultaneously as we are learning about Mahaprabhu delivering or liberating Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and also liberating Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and also learning about how Vidura and Maitreya, they're talking a lot about the difference between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the individual soul, or the part and parcel conditioned living entity, or liberated living entity, depending on where you are. So, the whole basis of the Mayavadi philosophy is that, as we were hearing last night from Ganesham Prabhu, that their idea is that the Brahman somehow or other is able to fragment itself, and then that fragment somehow or other comes in control of illusory energy, and by that fragment, well, that so-called fragment of Brahman, by that Brahman's cultivation of jnana and understanding of the difference between how matter and Maya is illusory and how the living entity is Brahman, by that development of knowledge they are able to somehow or other escape the illusory energy and again amalgamate or merge with the Brahman, or the sum total. But here we are seeing that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when He comes into the material world, He's not affected by the modes of material nature. In fact, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that when He enters into the material world, He enters in His self-same spiritual body. It is not that He takes a material body. Rather, His body is Satchit Ananda, and just as we hear the example Prabhupada gives, that as a king makes all the laws in the state, and if someone breaks the laws, they enter into the prison house. So when the king enters the prison house, it is not that he's broken any law. Neither it's not that he's under the control of any law. Rather, out of his own sweet will, he's entered into the prison house, and he's observing the prisoners there. Many years ago, I remember Bhakti Rasayana Sagar Maharaj. He gave a really nice story. He was mentioning how once a king, he entered into a prison house. And in that prison house, generally the king, when he enters, he sees to check whether the personality or the person there has actually rectified their conditioned consciousness or their improper consciousness. Because the whole idea of the prison house is to make sure that people learn their lesson, and also a crucial part is so that they can again, once again, go back into society, so that they can again become part of society. Because if there's one disturbing element in society, then the whole peace and happiness, so-called happiness of society falls apart. So he was mentioning how the king sometimes goes into the prison and is able to take out a prisoner, or even cut down a prisoner's sentence, depending on his, I guess, not whims, but depending on his intelligence and his understanding of the prisoner. So he was telling one day that when a king had entered into the prison house, he met the prisoners. And the first prisoner he met, he said, "So, why are you here? What happened?" And so the prisoner said, "Actually, my lord, I'm innocent. I've been put here unfairly." And so the king asked him, "So, what do you mean you've been put here unfairly?" He said, No, you see, I was just walking down the park, and this old person was sitting on the park bench, and I somehow or other found a knife. When I sat down, I found a knife. And when I picked up this knife, somehow I dropped the knife, and the knife somehow or other entered into this person's body. And so I picked up the knife again, and again it fell into that person's body. And in that way I was convicted of stabbing this person to death. But it's not my fault. It just so happened the knife fell onto this body. So the king thought, okay, so this fellow needs to learn a bit more. So then he went to the second person. And the second person said, "My lord, my lord, I'm innocent. I've been put into jail unfairly." And he says, "So what's your story?" And he says, "I just, went into my house. I then opened the door, tried to open the door, and found it was locked. So then I thought maybe I should enter through the window. So then I went into the window and I got inside the house. And when I went inside the house and had a look around, I thought, man, someone's changed the layout of my house. There's been a thief in here. So I thought I should go and check and see if my valuables are there safe. So I went to all the cupboards and safes, and it was pretty difficult, but I found all the valuables such nicely hidden, and I took them. And I thought, man, the thief may be still in the house, so I thought I should take him and go quickly before he comes. And then that's when the police caught me. But I'm innocent. But actually what had happened was he was the thief. He entered the wrong house on purpose. So then King understood, okay, this guy still needs some time to rectify his consciousness. And so he went to the third person. And then the third person said, you know, my lord, actually I did commit the sin. I did commit the crime. I did murder such and such a person. And I know I shouldn't have done it, but I did it, and now I'm learning my mistake. And so King understood, okay, this person is showing good behavior and his consciousness is becoming rectified. So then he cut down his sentence. So the idea behind this story, apart from the fact that we have crazy people as prisoners who think they're innocent but they're guilty, which is like us in the material world, right? Conditioned souls in the material world, we are stuck here and we're performing so many activities under the control of the mind and senses. Manasastendriyani pakatistani karshati. We're struggling under the 6 senses, including the mind, 5 senses in the mind. And we are thinking that we are innocent. But when you have a look at the mirror in the morning and see that body, you can understand you are not innocent. Because the fact that you have a material body means that you've committed an act against the Supreme Personality of Godhead's desire. Because being stuck here in the material world is the rectification program for the conditioned souls with the improper consciousness. Because we think, oh, you know, it's innocent to go and satisfy the senses' desires. It's innocent. It's just, you know, just like how the person was saying, you know, I dropped the knife and I entered into the body of the person. Or, you know, I just happened to enter this home, and my home was locked. And like that, the living entity thinks, you know, it just so happened the senses came in contact with the sense objects, you know, and what can you do? There's nothing better to do in the material world, you know. Anyway, the mind is the culprit actually, you know, not me. So the mind should be punished, not me. But actually it's not an innocent act. Actually it's an act of ignorance, and just as Prabhupada says that the living entity when the child touches fire and when an adult touches fire, the effect is the same. It is not that the fire will think, oh, here's a child, let me not burn him as much. No, the child will get burned and the father will get burned. There's no difference. Similarly in material existence, there is no excuse for ignorance. You may have knowledge, you may not have knowledge. And what's worse is if you have knowledge and don't act on that knowledge, still you get sinful reactions. In fact, those who have knowledge and don't act on that knowledge, they get more sinful reactions than those who don't have knowledge. Because it's a obvious disregard for the laws of material nature. Like that's what it's mentioned in the pastime of Lord Ramachandra. When Lord Ramachandra was ruling, at one particular point in time, a dog came seeking shelter of the Lord. And when the dog came to seek shelter of the Lord, he asked the Lord that, please, you have to save me. You have to give me justice. You know, I've been unfairly beaten very heavily. So Lord Ramachandra pacified the dog and asked him, so what is wrong? What happened? He said, you know, I was just barking. I'm a dog, I just bark. But then this Brahmana, he came and he unnecessarily beat me up. And so Ramachandra the dog took Lord Ramachandra to the Brahmana. And he asked the Brahmana, is this true? And the Brahmana said, yes. And so what did Lord Ramachandra say? When Lord Ramachandra told him that actually this is against the Brahmana principles. You're supposed to be peaceful and tolerant. You're not supposed to show such unnecessary displays of anger. What to speak of display, you even acted on it. So therefore you need to be punished. And so he asked the dog, so what punishment should we give him? And the dog told him, make him the leader of the mata, or a spiritual institution. Make him the topmost leader. And Lord Ramachandra in his pastime was thinking, he beat you and you want him to put in such a high elevated position? He said, yeah, actually I was the Matadipati, or I was the leader of that spiritual institution in my previous life, and now I became a dog. So let him go through the same difficulties in life. Another place it's mentioned how Lord Ramachandra's kingdom wasn't getting enough rain. In fact, it was a drought. And so it's a very well-known story that then Lord Ramachandra went to search out the whole kingdom. What's happening, anything wrong. And so then he sought the advice of the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas said that there's someone who is unqualified who's trying to perform tapasya. Someone who's unqualified and they're trying to perform tapasya, and because of such transgressions of the Varnashram Dharma, therefore rain is not coming in your kingdom. And so Lord Ramachandra sought out that person, and eventually he found some Sudra, some Chandala trying to perform austerities, severe austerities. And so he chastised this Chandala. And so you can see here that there is sinful reactions for activities we perform, but even more so for one who performs a sinful activity knowingly. Also, another place it's mentioned that when there was a sin, I think it's the Pandavas, when they came before, someone came before Pandavas and mentioned how there had been a murder. And so in this murder case, it so happened that one Brahmana, one Kshatriya, one Vaishya and one Shudra happened to be culprits in it. And so when they came before Lord Yudhishthira Maharaj told, okay, because you're a Shudra, you have no knowledge, you simply follow the other three, you leave. There's no punishment for you, you leave. But Yudhishthira Maharaj met out punishment to the other three. To the Vaishya he gave a certain punishment. To the Kshatriya he gave even more punishment. And to the Brahmana he gave the full punishment. Because he was saying to the degree of knowledge or to the degree of understanding, to that degree you're responsible to act. But if you don't act, then you must get the reaction. So therefore sometimes we see when we perform devotional service and we go out of line. And when we go out of line, there's a heavy reaction that comes from Maya. A heavy reaction, a very big slap. Sometimes it becomes such a big slap that we reel. We just don't know, we're so bewildered, we don't know what's happening. Because that is the mercy of Maya. And that sometimes comes in the form of heavy, strong words from the Guru. That is to make us go back in line. And that is meant to help us, again, further progress in devotional service. Another example Prabhupada gives is that we have 2 tracks. Right? 2 tracks. And it's mentioned that the Vedic literature and the instructions of the spiritual master, the 2 tracks. Do you remember? Anyway, another place Prabhupada says is Bhagavat Vidhi and Pancharachaka Vidhi. So the point is that these rules and regulations, they are like train tracks. And we are traveling on these train tracks. And if any particular section, one of the tracks deviates, then at the end of the line there's big chaos, destruction. There's going to be an accident waiting. So therefore the material energy always makes, either we meet that accident and then rectify, or by the mercy of the spiritual master, Sri Krishna and the other devotees, they immediately rectify us so that we come back on track again and continue going forward. So, yeah, so that there's no excuse to ignorance in this material world. Okay, so so the point I was trying to make was there's no such thing as an innocent mistake in this material world. You either make the mistake or you don't make the mistake. Alright, so then we are very fortunate, like I was saying, that we get the opportunity to hear about Mahaprabhu refute Mayavad philosophy in the evenings, and also hear in Bhagavatam how Maitreya Rishi is telling Vidura how the living entity is separate from the Lord. The Lord is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the sum total. He is the summum bonum. From him everything emanates, and at the end after destruction everything rests in him. And it's mentioned that although he may enter into the material world, he's not affected by it. Okay? But the living entity on the other hand, when he enters into the material world, he becomes entangled. He becomes under the sway of the material energy. So therefore the Lord and the living entity are of different categories, a caliber. Although the Lord and the living entity are one qualitatively, just like the sun and the moon and the reflection of the moon on water, they're one and the same in quality but not in quantity. In the sense that when the water shakes, it's the reflection that's affected, not the real moon. Right? So in the same way, the living entity is, what does the word Prabhupada use? It is liable to come, or able to come under the control of the material energy, whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not. And this quivering nature of the water and the effect that it has on the reflection of the moon, that is a living entity coming in contact with the modes of material nature and his or her mind becoming agitated according to the modes. Because if you have a look very carefully, you know, there's the saying that one man's treasure is another, one man's rubbish is another man's treasure, one man's food is another man's poison, so on and so forth. Similarly, if you have a look in material nature, for example, twins, they'll display different characteristics and they'll display different likes and dislikes, although having very similar bodily structure and being born from the same mother. So you can understand every living entity is affected by the modes in different ways. Therefore, living entities are attracted in different ways to the material energy. And this attraction, I was listening to a lecture of my spiritual master, he was saying it's like having a plate of prasadam before you. But imagine you had the same prasad in 3 different plates. One in a paper plate, one in a tin plate, and one in a gold diamond encrusted plate. So when you taste the prasad is going to taste the same, because it's the same prasad in each of the plate. But what the mind does is that it plays on you and says, actually if you take it from the gold encrusted plate, it'll taste better. But actually the action of the senses coming in contact with the sense objects is the same on each plate. But it is the mind that unnecessarily adds complication to it. In fact, there may be even people who will reject the gold plate for the paper plate and say, actually you'll taste better on the paper plate. But then again, it's the same taste because it's the same prasad on each of the plates. So in that way you can understand that in any form of life, that sense gratification, that sense happiness you'll get from attachment or the connection of the sense and the sense objects is going to be the same. Because it's all within the mind. It is just simply a mental concoction. That yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvai gunash tatra samasate suraha harava bhaktasya kuto mahadguna manorate nasato dhavato bahi. In that verse is mentioned manorate nasato dhavato bahi. That the non-devotees, because their mind is constantly wandering and becoming agitated, traveling on the chariot of the mind going here and there, although they may have so-called good qualities, it has no value. Whereas the devotees are full of all good qualities. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvai gunash tatra samasate suraha. Because of bhakti to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they are fixed. There's no bahushaka anantyascha buddhayo avavasayanam. They're fixed. Their consciousness is fixed. Their mind is not many branched. They're fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And being fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they're able to revive their lost consciousness, and by performing devotional service, which is the means and methods to becoming fixed in Krishna's lotus feet, then they're able to escape the clutches of material energy. So here in the purport of this verse, Prabhupada's talking about how Vidura is very grateful that even though Vidura is so knowledgeable, being Yamaraj himself, what to speak of Yamaraj, his father is Vyasadeva. Vidura's father is Vyasadeva. Vidura was able to learn everything about the Vedas from his father. In fact, he was the instructor to the Pandavas and to his brother Dhritarashtra as a proper minister. And he went from pilgrimage place to pilgrimage place, hearing from the saintly persons, from Uddhava and from Maitreya. Still, it's mentioned that even a personality like Vidura, he has to consult sages like Maitreya, because the subtle nature of the science of Krishna consciousness is that it's not immediately perceived by everyone. It requires one to take shelter of the spiritual master. That there's that verse that Yasya deve para bhaktir yata devi tata guru tasyeta katita hyarta pakashante mahatmanaha. That actually the living and the disciple, Yasya Deva Para Bhakti, by their unflinching faith in the spiritual master, then they're able to understand the import or the confidential meaning of the Shastra, because the spiritual master is very obliged to impart the meaning to them. So when we come in contact with devotional service, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, reading Srila Prabhupada's books and understanding the Bhakti Tattva, or the knowledge of devotional service, we come from a hangover of material existence, wherein there are two problems. One is that we think that we can conquer or understand the subject matter simply by reading and memorizing. So we'll understand if we just simply read and memorize this. And second is that we don't care for the consciousness. We just simply go to understand however we like. But spiritual knowledge is not like that. The consciousness and mood is very important, and the second thing is that that brings about the proper understanding that I cannot understand everything on my own. I am dependent on understanding from the mercy, by the mercy of the spiritual master, coming from Krishna. So this mood of tad vidhi paripatena pariprashnena sevaya upatekshanti te jnanam naninas tattva darshana, that they will be very pleased. Who? Those who have seen the truth. They will be very pleased to impart the knowledge unto you. How? By rendering pleasing service and humble inquiries, or submissively inquiring from them about the absolute truth. If you're able to do these things, then naturally they will impart knowledge unto you, being very pleased with you. Now, another thing that's very easily misunderstood is that the more knowledge one has in the material world, the more proud they become. Age of information, right? Today, this age of Kali, age of information, where people think, I have everything because I have a smartphone and I have Google. So it's easy. It's very easy for me to understand. I'm in power. I have the knowledge. I can do anything I like. I remember in university when there was one particular person, and we were doing our assignments, a group assignment and things like that. And I still remember that people had no clue what was happening in this assignment. They had no idea what was happening in this particular group project. But I remember how much faith they had in Google. Because to be able to do some of that, they needed to attend lectures, have some understanding things. And these people came with no understanding whatsoever. They just randomly rocked up because they have to do the assignment. But their faith in Google was so strong. But anyway, they got caught for plagiarism later on. That's a different story. But the point here is that when people have no knowledge, they have faith in information, then they have this unnecessary pride and arrogance which eventually leads to their fall down anyway. Whereas one who's with full knowledge in the Vedic understanding, they are humble, knowing that actually I don't know anything. Whatever little I know is by the mercy of my spiritual master, and there is so much more to learn. Unfortunately, without the mercy of my spiritual master, I cannot understand. So their mood is that of humility. Here Vidura, so Prabhupada is saying here, is the science of Krishna, or the science of God in living entities, is so subtle that even a personality like Vidura has to consult persons like the sage Maitreya. And why? Because the doubts about the eternal relationship with the Lord and the living entity are created by mental speculators in different ways. So, if you see the nature of association in this material world, jana sangha, if you have a look out in the material world, when you perform your activities, day-to-day activities, then you can see that every single aspect or every single thing that you come in contact with material nature is geared to make you forget about Krishna. So if you have a look when you go on the streets, when you walk on the streets, then the general tendency of everyone around you is to enjoy their senses. Why? Because they don't consider Krishna at all. If you have a look at the billboards, if you have a look at advertisements that are so prominent everywhere, they're encouraging what? You only live once. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the senses. Don't care about anything else. Don't even care about the other human beings around you. Just enjoy your senses. You only live once. So the idea is there that unknowingly, subliminally, we are also getting the association of all these mental speculators who think that the Supreme Personality of Godhead doesn't exist, or if it exists, then He simply exists to satisfy our senses. Or even worse than that, that we are God and that we should enjoy our senses. So The nature of association is very, very crucial, and if we don't check or don't minimize our association with the material nature, with other living entities who are averse to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, doubts within the heart arise. And doubts arise in the heart, and it begins with something simple, where if you're in the association of friends or work colleagues, then you end up speaking about mundane subject matter. And to be part of the group, sometimes you'll end up going to research about mundane subject matter. For example, politics. You become so engrossed in understanding politics, what's happening, you read the news regularly, so that you can engage in such conversations with such colleagues or friends. And gradually, by the time you even realize it, your whole consciousness is geared towards one particular party or one particular understanding. So, what does that bring about in the heart? Then in the heart it begins, the doubts begin churning within the heart. Then one begins to doubt the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One begins to doubt that whether I am even the soul or am I the body. Because becoming so attached to political subject matters, as an example, then one becomes more and more attached to the defending principle. Eating, sleeping, mating and defending. One then becomes attached to the body and identifies with the body. And then one begins to doubt. That doubt begins to arise within the heart, and naturally Maya will then egg you on or urge you that actually, maybe you aren't the soul, maybe you're just the body. And if you're the body, you should satisfy the body and maintain the body. You should please the senses. So therefore, you should continue going in this way. And as we know in that verse, Dhyato Vishyan Pumsa, by the end of it, you're lost. You're stuck in the whirlpool of material existence once again. So these doubts arise within the heart due to the bad association of mental speculators and fruitive workers. Now, how to make sure that you're not affected by that? Prabhupada says that the process of revival is devotional service to the Lord. So we engage in devotional service very, very, very vigorously. Akama sarva kamava moksha kama udaradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajita purusha param. That whether you're full of desires, you have no desires, or you're liberated, engage in devotional service to the Lord with full focus, like that of a laser. Full focus like a laser. When light is diffused, then what happens is that the potency of the light is very weak. But when that light becomes narrow or focused to a certain point, it becomes very strong, like a laser. And when it's focused and becomes very strong like a laser, it has impact, it has effect. So the same way, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, with determination and strong dedication when you perform devotional service, then you can cut these doubts within the heart and revive your lost consciousness of Nitya Krishna Prema Sadhu Kabinoy Yashavanadi Shuddha Chitta Karya Udoy. That actually Krishna consciousness or love of Godhead is dormant within the heart. It just needs to be revived. But unfortunately it won't become revived unless Shavanadi Shuddha Chitta Karya Udoy. That the consciousness has to become cleansed by the hearing process. Shavana Adi, beginning with hearing. Shavana Adi Shuddha Chitta Karya Udhoy. Then Udhoy, it rises like the sun rises and the fog dissipates. Similarly, when you hear about Krishna, pastimes of Krishna, Nam, Rup, Guna, Lila, and the paraphernalia and entourage, so on and so forth of the Lord, then naturally the heart becomes cleansed. And becoming cleansed, one is able to see that actually the Lord is the predominator and the living entities are the predominated. Ekla Ishvara Krishna Arshabhritya. Everyone is a servant of the Lord. Like yesterday was Balaram Jayanti, and the mood of Balaram was that of complete service, or being a complete servant to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if Balaram is like that, what to speak of all the other incarnations which emanate from Lord Balaram? And if all incarnations are eager, they're so eager to serve Krishna, just like we hear the pastime of how Arjuna went to Mahavishnu's loka with Krishna. And Mahavishnu actually says that actually I was eager to see you, Krishna. Therefore I stole those children. Right? So if Mahavishnu finds it extremely difficult to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, but his mood is that of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they're being served. You have to understand one thing. They're being served by so many innumerable living entities. But the incarnations of the Lord are eager to serve the fountainhead, Lord Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan himself. So that is the mood. He is the predominator and everything else is predominated. But that does not mean that we relegate the position of the incarnations to that of our level. We are still Vibhinamsha and they are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Swamsa, or the direct parts and the direct expansions of the Lord, whereas we remain the parts and parcels of the Lord. But again, the mood is that of complete servitude to the Lord. Therefore, the Lord is the eternal predominator and the living entities are eternally predominated. By clearly understanding from authorities like the sage Maitreya, one can become situated in real knowledge, and the disturbed mind can thus be fixed on the progressive path. So that's quite self-explanatory. The point is to lend the hearing process, or the ears, excuse me, to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Jnanam prayasam udapasana mantameva jivanti san mukuritam bhavadiya vartam sthaneshtita shutigatam tanuvan manobhir ye jita jito apiyas traisi lokyam. I'm forgetting a word. There Brahma is telling Lord Krishna in the after the Brahma Vimohana Lila, in his prayers. He's telling that jnana prayasam udapasana mantameva jivanti san mukuritam bhavadiya vartam, that if a living entity just simply jnana prayasam udapasana mantameva, that gives up this mental speculation process and just takes shelter of your lotus feet, jivanti san mukuritam bhavadiya vartam, that they engage their mind, senses in simply glorifying you, engaging in your activities. And sthane stita shutit gatam tanavan manobhir, that whatever position they are, they remain situated in that position, but they lend their hearing to hearing of your glories. Then they're able to conquer you who are usually unconquerable. So Mahaprabhu quotes this verse, and Prabhupada often mentions that it is okay, whatever position you are in, remain there, it's fine, but just hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Hear the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hear about Krishna. Because that process will gradually purify you to the extent that you'll come to the platform of real knowledge and you'll become undisturbed. Undisturbed by the mind, undisturbed by the senses. And becoming undisturbed by the mind and senses, then you can engage in devotional service, not being affected by the so-called happiness and distress of this material world. So, the whole process here of Vidura asking questions from Maitreya is for our benefit. And by hearing these questions and answers, we are also becoming purified, because the doubts within our hearts is slowly being swept away, being cut, and we are reviving our original Krishna consciousness. Now, this process of devotional service is so great that simply by hearing, which is the process of devotional service, and also it is the end of devotional service. We chant Hare Krishna so we can chant more, and we hear about Krishna so that we can continuously hear about Him more and more. So here, there was this word here, Prabhupada saying, that mana me sampradavati, my mind perfectly enters. My mind is now perfectly entering into them. So, when one becomes it becomes purified in Krishna consciousness, then one's mind is completely absorbed in the Lord. And what is that absorption? That oneness of interest. Whatever the Lord wants, the devotee immediately acts and performs. And devotional service is so powerful that even a neophyte devotee who just begins to chant Hare Krishna is able to experience this simple process of how one's able to absorb their mind in Krishna. Because simply by practicing devotional service, then naturally the heart becomes cleansed, when one is able to perform the activities that even great liberated souls are performing. Prabhupada says that the facilities that were available to the Pandavas, the facilities for serving Krishna that were available to gopis, are available to us also. we also have the same facility to serve and worship the Lord. But what differentiates us from those particular living entities, those Nitya Siddhas, is their attachment and their bhakti, or their love and devotion for the Lord. I remember this, I suddenly remembered that when Narad Muni visited all the palaces of the queens of Lord Krishna, and he observed Krishna in every one of these palaces, when he entered into Rukmini's palace, it's mentioned that the Lord was sitting on the bed. And while he was sitting on the bed, and even though Rukmini Devi had 1,000 maidservants who were equal to her in character, in beauty, in clothing, and all these qualities, still Rukmini Devi picked up the chamar and was fanning Krishna. So what is it that made her think? Because if they're all equal in that sense, according to that understanding, then what makes her so special that she directly serves Krishna? It is that her love and devotion was much more than her maidservants, and that she could provide Krishna better service than the others. And the others, understanding this, simply assisted in Rukmini Devi in her service to the Lord. Same thing with the gopis. The gopis all understand, all know that when Krishna is with Srimati Radharani, Krishna's bliss is the most. So then all the manjaris, all the gopis engage in bringing Krishna and Radharani together. So in devotional service it is like that we are given the opportunity, although the Lord will get so much more pleasure from his service of his Nitya Siddhas, still He is so kind that He accepts our service. That we cook for the Lord and the Lord accepts it. Although the Lord has every right to reject it and accept service from His Nitya Siddhas, from His personal entourage, still He accepts that service, understanding our position and giving us more and more mercy so that we can progress gradually in devotional service. So here in this verse, there are a couple of points I touched on. First is that this understanding of the living entity in relationship with the Lord, that is the special mercy of the Lord, especially now that we're hearing about the Mayavad philosophy and how Maitreya is answering Vidura's questions, and how Vidura, even though being such a great personality, has to consult persons like Sage Maitreya to understand the subtle nature of Krishna consciousness, because Krishna consciousness is not some mundane acquirement of knowledge. Rather, one is able to understand Krishna consciousness simply by the mercy of those who have seen or who have become perfect disciples of their spiritual masters, and who have been who understand the knowledge having been imparted onto them. They can then impart it onto the faithful servant or the faithful disciple. And then we also talked about how the Lord is the predominator and the living entities are predominated, to the extent that even the Lord's incarnations are His servants. That He is the master, Ekala Ishvara Krishna, our Sarvabhritya. And then we also talked about the nature of devotional service, how devotional service allows us to control the mind. In fact, controlling the mind just as a simple side benefit actually allows us to engage in devotional service to the extent the same devotional service that's available to the Nitya Siddhas. And that we should become very careful to protect this and not allow external stimulus or external obstacles to come in our way. And to do that, we always stay within the protective circle of the association of devotees. And that way we'll be able to cut the doubts of our understanding or doubts about the eternal relationship with the Lord and the living entity. So that's this verse today, and we'll then read a bit more about how Vidura responds to Maitreya, and how we can also understand the etiquette or the relationship between the questioner and the answerer, or the person speaker and the one who's hearing. That we can understand how Vidura tells Maitreya that he has understood what he has said, and also encourages him to continue speaking. And then we hear further questions by Vidura, which will then be addressed in the next chapter. So I'll end here if there are any comments or questions. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande.